Hello guys, welcome to my channel Lucid Fanfic, and if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. The miraculous had become the norm in the city where the Yagi family lived, a society in which peculiarities controlled all facets of existence. It was possible to control the weather with a thought, heal with a touch, and even control fire. Quirks were more than just abilities in this culture. They were the core of potential, identity, and purpose. They were the secret to popularity and success. In a world so full of wonder, the silent, the unusual, and the helpless were frequently forgotten. But even in such a world, one thing remained constant: All Might, a tall, unflinching symbol of hope. All Power, the symbol of peace. His very arrival sent shivers of relief through the nation, making him a hero. He had effortlessly destroyed evil and saved countless lives with his brilliant smile and unlimited vitality. Every resident knew who he was, and even the most eccentric people could not deny his legendary reputation. Hope seemed to sizzle in the air as All Might walked into a room. Just being around him made people feel better and safer. His legacy conveyed the idea that anyone could be a hero, not simply his physical prowess. He was viewed by the world as the epitome of what a hero ought to be. His father was a living legend in the world in which Izuku was born. Izuku was different from his father, nevertheless, in spite of his majesty. He saw no magic in the realm of oddities. He had no power that he could claim. He was quirkless. All Might and Izuku Yagi's son, Izuku Yagi, was a quiet kid. He grew up observing the admiration that people had for his father by watching his valiant actions on the television. Everyone loved, praised, and appreciated All Might's every gesture. It was impossible to avoid his father's iconic presence, and everyone he encountered regarded Izuku with sympathy, occasionally with interest, and other times with derision. "You're the son of All Might, correct?" With expectations in their eyes, they would say. Izuku would give a nod, but he knew in his heart he could never be like his father, no matter how hard he tried. For someone like him, the brilliance of his father was an impossible standard. He would never have the strength to defend, fight, or motivate others in the same manner. It seemed as though Izuku's position in the world was a shadow that lurked in the background. Izuku Yagi, his mother, was once a remarkable hero in her own right. Her ability to manipulate gravity was truly remarkable. It gave her unparalleled power and agility by enabling her to lift, manipulate, and change the very flow of gravity around her. But in order to raise her family, she had long since given up that life. Even so, her legacy remained every so often. A glance from an old friend or a retired hero would remind Izuku that his mother was once someone powerful too. And lastly, the one who received regular attention was Himari, Izuku's younger sister. Izuku was an afterthought in a family with so much potential since he lacked a peculiarity. A youngster born with a flawless quirk was his sister. Light manipulation was Himari's peculiarity. She had the ability to make destructive concentrated light beams, dazzling flashes, and bend light about herself. She was considered a prodigy by many. She was all her parents could have ever wanted in a child. She could easily tidy up after meetings, assist with training programs for young heroes, and help plan school activities. Everyone in her immediate vicinity could see that Himari was destined for greatness. And naturally, All Might and Izuku showered her with praise. "Dad, Mom, can you guess what I did today?" When she came inside that night, Himari shouted, her voice full of enthusiasm. Playfully, her quirk ignited around her, transforming the ordinary into the magical. "Sweetheart, what is it?" With her hands busy preparing dinner, Izuku questioned. "After school, I assisted in setting up the seats for the meeting. The professors found it easier to set up everything because of my light. And you ought to have seen their expressions when I used my peculiarity to repair the lights." Himari's hands glowed with radiant energy as she narrated the day's victories, her eyes sparkling. Izuku gazed down at her daughter with a proud smile. "Himari, that is incredible. You're really helpful. Like your father, you have a bright future ahead of you." All Might, towering in the doorway, patted his daughter on the head. "That's my girl. You've got the makings of a real hero. Keep it up, and you'll go far." Izuku picked at his food while sitting calmly at the edge of the table. In the fog of his mind, his thoughts were elsewhere. His parents' glowing admiration and Himari's bright grin were like a faraway echo so far away. The cautious, calm child who sat among them went unnoticed. It was almost impossible for him to recall the last time he had been genuinely gazed at and told, "Izuku, you're doing wonderful too." Rather, they appeared to notice him only when something was off. He was the invisible son, the one who didn't conform to the expectations of society for the kid of all might. Izuku, however, was not like the rest. Izuku depended on his intellect, while other children relied on their eccentricities. He had long since come to the conclusion that greatness might be achieved without a peculiarity. He could make something better. He had the ability to construct things that no one else could imagine. As the world progressed, Izuku remained in his room every day after school, poring over antique mechanical gadgets, books, and schematics in an attempt to solve the problem that kept him up at night. How could he convince everyone that he was as significant as his sister? How could he demonstrate that he possessed something that could alter the course of history, even in the absence of a quirk? Izuku had already started to get obsessed with engineering at the age of 6. He had always enjoyed disassembling toys, gadgets, and malfunctioning machinery. The underlying workings of things that others missed were visible to him. He was aware of how systems worked, how power moved, and how gears spun. He had a deeper understanding of them than most. He had made his first significant breakthrough at the age of 6. Someone had brought a tiny drone for the children to play with during the party his family was throwing. Izuku had found it fascinating, even if the drone had broken down and fell into the garden. He worked on the damaged components for the remainder of the evening until he was able to put it back together. It didn't work exactly as it had before, but it flew again barely. It was enough. He had a strong desire to create, build, and innovate as a result of that minor victory. His mind was an incessant machine, and it became sharper every day. Izuku was sitting at the supper table now, thinking about his most recent project. His thoughts strayed to a novel concept he had been developing for several weeks, an apparatus capable of controlling electromagnetic fields. Though it was a tiny prototype, it belonged to him even though it was nothing in comparison to his parents' amazing inventions. He was the only one who could comprehend it. Work could only be made by him. Over the last few days, he had been testing magnetic fields, creating complex circuits, and experimenting with various materials. The outcomes had been encouraging. Like people with idiosyncrasies, he would soon have something that could change the surroundings. He made an impression without a peculiarity. However, the same unsaid fact persisted throughout the night. He grew up in a world full with heroes, where everyone had something valuable to contribute, but Izuku had nothing. To those around him, at least, it appeared that way. Izuku, however, was wiser. He would disprove them. He would be something better than his father, but he would not be a hero. He would change the world in his own way. In many respects, school served as a battlefield. For the majority of students, it served as a learning environment where they refined their eccentricities and got ready for the future. Izuku Yagi saw it as a laboratory, something completely different. A controlled setting with many variables that allowed for the analysis, prediction, and neutralization of predictable patterns of human behavior. Izuku had already recognized the crucial weakness in the structure of society in this quirk-ruled world where power and spectacle were valued above all else. Without intelligence, strength was just chaos. And mayhem? That was under control. The Yagi siblings were polar opposites at school. Their class's brightest star was Himari, who exuded charisma and brightness. Her natural charm was only enhanced by her ability to manipulate light, which attracted both teachers and students to her. She led class projects, performed exceptionally well in group activities, and was generally considered the heir apparent to their father's valiant legacy. Izuku, however, was a mystery. Quiet and eccentric, he received no admiration from peers or praise from teachers. However, he did not directly provoke their disdain. Even though his family name protected him from direct derision, the sneers and contemptuous looks persisted. He was indifferent. His classmates were data points, their peculiarities predictable in their limitations, their actions reducible to algorithms of envy, insecurity, and pride. They were instruments, each with a purpose he could use if needed, or barriers that could be carefully eliminated. Students poured into the cafeteria as the lunch bell rang, creating a clatter of chairs scuffing against tile floors. Izuku remained, organizing his notebook with care. Every page served as a storehouse of ideas, observations, and theories. His thoughts were focused on his most recent schematic, a small energy dispersal module. Although it wasn't his most ambitious endeavor, it was effective. The door slammed. "Oi, Deku!" Katsuki Bakugo's sharp voice echoed in the empty classroom. With his usual lackeys beside him, Bakugo's aggressive swagger filled the space. His red eyes blazed with a challenge that needed no words. "Still hiding in here with your stupid toys, huh?" Izuku kept his eyes on his notebook. "You're interrupting," he replied, his tone flat. The lackeys laughed, thinking Izuku's calm meant he was giving in. Bakugo's grin grew, but it wasn't a friendly one, it was the grin of a wolf sensing prey. "Interrupting? Nah, I'm giving you a chance to show you're not completely useless." Izuku closed his notebook carefully. The sound echoed in the quiet that followed. When he met Bakugo's gaze, his expression was cold and hard as steel. "Spare me the theatrics," Izuku said. "Your insecurities are boring." The room froze. The lackeys exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension. Bakugo's grin faded, replaced by a snarl. "What did you say?" "You're predictable," Izuku continued. He stood and put his notebook into his bag. "A blunt instrument. Dangerous only to those who can't see your moves. You rely on strength because you don't have the brains to do differently." Bakugo exploded instantly, hurling a fiery blast straight at Izuku's chest. But Izuku was already in motion. The detonation scorched the air where Izuku had stood just a moment before. With precise timing, Izuku activated the pulse deterrent hidden on his wrist. The device sent out a focused sonic wave that knocked Bakugo off balance. He staggered briefly. "You think you're so smart." Bakugo growled, regaining his footing. "You can't beat power." Izuku didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a second device, a flash emitter, and activated it with a quick flick of his fingers. A blinding light filled the room, forcing Bakugo and his lackeys to recoil and shield their eyes. "Coward!" Bakugo yelled, lunging at Izuku without thinking. Izuku easily sidestepped, using Bakugo's own speed against him. The explosive teen stumbled, his punch missing by just inches. Izuku placed a hand on Bakugo's shoulder, pushing him further off balance. "You rely too much on instinct," Izuku said, his tone as cold as ever. "It makes you easy to predict." "Sloppy." Bakugo spun around, unleashing a series of explosions. This time, Izuku pulled out a magnetic disruptor from his pocket. The small gadget sent out a focused pulse that interrupted the chemical reactions in Bakugo's sweat-based explosions. The blasts fizzled out harmlessly, leaving only thin trails of smoke. Bakugo's lackeys, still dazed and confused, stumbled around in the background. "You're pathetic," Bakugo spat, his face twisted in anger. "You hide behind your stupid gadgets because you're weak." Izuku tilted his head slightly, as if examining an interesting bug. "And yet, here you are, unable to land a single hit." Bakugo charged again, letting rage take over any sense of strategy. Izuku caught his wrist mid-swing, twisting it just enough to force Bakugo to lose his stance. His green eyes locked onto Bakugo's, his grip firm but not cruel. "This isn't a fight," Izuku said calmly. "It's a demonstration." He let go of Bakugo and stepped back, turning off his devices. The silence that followed was heavy. Bakugo's lackeys remained unsure whether to intervene or back off. "This isn't over." Bakugo growled, a mix of anger and frustration in his voice. "I'll crush you, Deku. You'll see." Izuku didn't respond. He picked up his bag and walked toward the door, his expression unchanged. The confrontation had tested his devices under pressure and shown him a critical flaw in his peers. They lacked control. As Izuku left the classroom, he saw Himari in the hallway. She was surrounded by friends, her laughter bright and easy. She noticed him but didn't acknowledge his presence. He didn't mind. Their lives, while parallel, seldom crossed. "You okay, Izuku?" one of her friends asked, her tone laced with mock concern. "He's fine," Himari replied before he could speak. Her tone wasn't mean, but it felt dismissive. "He's used to it." Izuku kept walking, his gaze steady. Words, like quirks, were just another variable. Himari's superiority complex was simply another obstacle to manage. Later that evening, the family gathered for dinner. Himari shared stories about her day excitedly, her parents hanging on her every word. Izuku ate quietly, His mind focused on improving his devices. The family dynamic didn't bother him. It was just another predictable part of his life. After dinner, he went to his room. The small space was neatly organized, each tool and component in its spot. On his desk, a prototype for a new project gleamed in the dim light. The world around him was chaotic and flawed, filled with inefficiencies. But he would change that not with brute strength or flashy moves, but with what truly mattered: logic. Morning sun rays crept through the slits in Izuku's curtains, throwing pale patterns onto his workbench. The room was an organized disorder of blueprints, unfinished devices, and carefully labeled components. There was a soft hum in the air from a tiny device whirring on his desk, its vibrations sending out a pale blue glow. Izuku calibrated the knob on the device so that the energy output would be even. It was an improvement on a device he'd just constructed, a brief-range pulse generator that had a temporary interference effect on electronic signals. Originally faulty because of overheating, it now worked flawlessly after several weeks of tinkering. Content: Izuku settled back and breathed softly. His eyes swept to the corner of his workspace, where a pile of blueprints lay. They showed devices much more ambitious than anything he'd constructed to date: an energy amplifier, a machine that would recycle materials automatically, even a concept design for an electromagnetic drive device. "If only I had the equipment," Izuku groaned, his tone laced with desperation. He ruffled his hair, taking in the paltry pieces that lay out on his desk. He'd spent all his funds weeks prior. His parents wouldn't give him money for what they deemed unimportant distractions, and he couldn't afford them himself. He stood up, putting the pulse generator in his pocket, and reached for his bag. One step at a time, he muttered to himself. The day lingered in a blur of monotonous routine. Teachers spoke of quirk applications and hero rules, subjects which barely penetrated Izuku's consciousness. His thoughts were always elsewhere, simulating, writing equations, dreaming up the potentialities of his next invention. That it wasn't until the lunch bell that reality broke through. Bakugo and his minions cornered him at the edge of the schoolyard, their silhouettes looming over him like clouds of storm. "Oi, Yagi," Bakugo growled, cracking his knuckles. "Still hiding behind your little toys?" Izuku, who had been taking notes in his notebook, did not even bother to glance up. He simply kept going, his pencil moving smoothly across the page. "What? Too afraid to come at me without one of your machines? You really think you're that smart, huh?" Bakugo sneered, his voice escalating. Izuku concluded his line and shut the notebook with a neat gesture. He stashed it in his bag and at last looked up, his face inscrutable. "Your style is predictable, Bakugo," Izuku replied levelly. "I've already said it to you, brute force isn't the sole means to victory." Bakugo's scowl grew darker. "Shut up. You're a quirkless loser using scraps of metal as an excuse." The minions snickered, but the laughter faltered as there was a hesitation in it. They'd heard this before. Izuku patted his pocket, producing the pulse generator. Its streamlined shape caught the sunlight as he activated it with a small flick of his thumb. "You've tried this approach countless times," Izuku said, his tone cool and clinical. "And each time, the outcome is the same. If you were capable of learning from your mistakes, you'd have realized by now." Bakugo's face twisted with anger. "I'll blow that thing to pieces." You little before he could complete, Izuku triggered the button. A clean pulse expanded outward, and Bakugo staggered, grasping his head as his balance faltered. His minions stumbled, their footing disrupted by the shock. Izuku didn't give them time to regain themselves. He slipped around them with the same measured calmness he always possessed, leaving Bakugo fuming behind him. The remainder of the day at school passed quietly, apart from the periodic glares Bakugo aimed his way. Izuku ignored them. He had long since learned to disregard such annoyances. As the final bell tolled, and the day came to a close, Izuku gathered his belongings with practiced speed. Passing out of the room, he heard the familiar voices from down the corridor. "Today's the day," Bakugo grumbled, his voice low and venomous. "We'll wait for him by the alley by the park. He won't see it coming." "Yeah," one of his henchmen interrupted. "Let's see him try to weasel out of this one." Izuku lingered just long enough to get the gist of what they were saying. He readjusted the strap on his bag and headed in the opposite direction. "They're nothing if not tenacious," he whispered, a small smile twisting the edge of his mouth. He didn't feel like being part of another trap set by Bakugo's crew, so he opted to try a different route. Entering another of Bakugo's traps was exhausting, and he wasn't up for more trouble. There hung in the air the smell of rust and salt. Before him lay a beach, but not a clean one. It was a junkyard of shattered appliances, smashed furniture, and twisted metal. Izuku stood still, his gaze taking in the mess. To others, it would be an ugly dump, but to him, it was something different. Following his diversion down to the beach, Izuku surveyed the vast expanse of trash, junked appliances, corroded equipment, and knotted wires. His scientist's mind sprang into action, perceiving not a desert but a gold mine of potential. He dropped down close to a pile of smashed washing machines, prying open compartments with care and examining the contents. Rusty, fragile, worthless, he grumbled, discarding a charred circuit board. But occasionally his fingers touched something worth saving: a gear still whole, a working motor, or usable wire. He worked systematically, drawing anything of value into his bag. When the sun set below the horizon, the sun casting long shadows on the sand, Izuku's backpack was packed full. Content. He brushed his hands and headed home. In his room, Izuku dumped his discoveries onto his desk. It was an unhomely collection of wires, circuits, and scrap metal. He switched on his desk lamp, its light illuminating the disorganized collection as he started sifting through every piece. The initial euphoria dissipated as he unfolded the pieces one by one. He turned over a rusty coil, and only part of it collapsed in his hands. "Much of this is rubbish," he growled, annoyance creeping into his tone. A rapid survey showed him that much of what he had recovered was either too badly damaged or simply useless. Never one to waste time dawdling. Izuku sat back in his chair, running a pencil over his chin. His quick mind set to work putting solutions together. Rather than worrying about what he couldn't do, he thought of what he could create. But frustration turned almost instantly into determination. He seized a blank sheet of paper and started drawing in furious bursts. "If I can't depend on the material as it stands," he muttered, "then I'll make it work." Point two designs began to emerge beneath his pencil. The first was a material analyzer, a portable scanner that would be able to swiftly identify trash versus recoverable components. By detecting density, conductivity, and molecular integrity, it would enable him to process the wreckage with pinpoint accuracy. The second was a more ambitious endeavor, a renewable matter converter, a machine that would disassemble unusable material and recycle it as energy or raw material. It was intricate, much more so than anything he had ever constructed before, but the possibilities were too vast to overlook. The faint glow of Izuku's room lit up his intent face, casting long shadows across the untidy desk. Before him was a device, almost finished, its smooth body of reused metal containing a complex system of circuits and microprocessors. The material analyzer was shaping up a tool that would sort useful parts from useless trash. It was not a luxury, but a requirement for someone who had limited resources to work with. Izuku's fingers danced with mechanical efficiency, a soldering iron clutched in one hand and tweezers in the other. He fed the final wire home, attaching a sensor node to the analyzer's mainboard. The sweet smell of flux hung in the air as he turned off the iron and leaned back, inspecting the device. The material analyzer was compact, no bigger than a cell phone, with a screen that showed overlays of data and a scanning lens built into the middle. Izuku clicked a button, and the device came to life with a gentle hum. Lines of code scrolled across the screen as it booted up, indicating the systems were online. He picked up a box of repair parts, taking a handful of salvaged wires, rusty screws, and broken capacitors. Cradling the analyzer over the collection, he engaged the scanning function. A soft blue beam passed over the objects, and data filled the screen. Conductivity, 32%. Structural integrity, compromised. Material, aluminum alloy, degraded. The device informed in a soothing, synthesized tone. Izuku's hand running over the casing of the device. Operational. But the algorithm must be perfected. The precision isn't where it should be. He quickly jotted down some note in his journal, writing down ideas for optimization. It would do for now. Izuku didn't hesitate. Now that the analyzer was online, he shifted his focus to his most ambitious project to date, the renewable matter converter. Blueprints for the device littered his desk, a messy spiderweb of schematics and equations. The idea was simple enough in concept, but frustratingly complicated to implement. Disassemble waste matter and reassemble it into useful energy or raw materials. Days became hours as Izuku labored on the converter. His concentration was unrelenting, his steps precise as he constructed prototypes, experimented with energy streams, and fine-tuned power sources. The subtle whir of his tools echoed in the room, mingling with the crisp tinkle of used pieces. Gradually, his workshop fell into planned mayhem, blueprints strewn about, tools stacked carelessly, and a cold tea abandoned on the work surface. By the fourth model, he had observed a trend with the breakdowns. Each test failed the same way. Energy lost during the process of conversion was too extensive, and breakdown of the molecules was irregular. The converter had the ability to break down materials to their most basic constituents, but it could not produce the energy needed to continue the process. "It's not computing," Izuku grumbled, his voice hard to hear amidst the whine of the newest prototype. His green eyes scanned the information on the screens before him. The figures didn't lie, all variables were accounted for, but the machine still wouldn't perform as it should. He disassembled the prototype and began anew, testing subsystems in isolation. He replaced a faulty component, redesigned the energy intake, and tweaked the output stabilizer. Each version saw slight improvement, but the underlying problem remained. Izuku stretched his fingers, cramped with hours of soldering. His eyes looked bloodshot, his posture rigid as he stooped over the workbench. The whir of the converter filled the air, a constant reminder of how close he was and how far. The 11th model came to life, its screen glowing with encouraging energy readings. Izuku stood up, his eyes fixed on the machine as it worked through a tiny bit of scrap metal. The hum increased, a low rumble that vibrated through the tools surrounding it. The energy readings held firm for a brief moment, steadily rising. Suddenly, however, they shot perilously high. Izuku slammed the emergency cutoff, the machine shutting down with a metallic snap. Smoke curled from the input chamber, and he gazed at the burnt remains of the test material. His face didn't change, but his pencil tapped against the notebook with careful rhythm. "The problem isn't mechanical," he said softly. "It's the energy dynamics. I'm missing something basic." Izuku's rational mind drove him towards the next step: research. He wanted information that was beyond his existing grasp of physics and engineering. Having secured his workshop, he proceeded to the city library. The library was enormous and silent, its high shelves topped with books on every conceivable topic. Izuku navigated the aisles purposefully, flipping through titles and grabbing anything that had to do with energy systems or material science. By the time he was browsing the shelves under theoretical physics, his pile of books threatened to topple over. One caught his eye: Foundations of Quantum Mechanics, its gilded letters dulled by years of use. Izuku browsed through its pages, reading over passages on wave-particle duality, superposition, and states of energy. The potential was overwhelming, reframing his conception of energy manipulation. His keen brain worked through the ideas with brutal economy. The gaps in his designs weren't mechanical failures, they were failures of vision. Energy wasn't a smooth flow. It came in discrete packets, subject to probability and quantum effects. "This explains it," he whispered. It was an epiphany. It was falling into place, the simplicity of watching pieces of a puzzle click into alignment. Returning to his workshop, Izuku dived into the quantum mechanics book, correlating it with his notes and blueprints. Energy transfer was not a straightforward exchange. It was a matter of quantum tunneling, resonance stabilization, and state transitions. With this information in mind, Izuku started over on the blueprint for the renewable matter converter. His pencil glided across the page in careful strokes, drawing up designs that respected quantum coherence and energy efficiency. His notebook was filled with equations, every variable rounded down to the last decimal. The new model was more streamlined and effective, with quantum stabilizers and state regulators. Izuku's concentration was unyielding, his steps calculated as he put the pieces together. Days passed without distinction, yet his mind stayed keen, his determination unbroken. As the final contact was made, Izuku activated the prototype. The device whirred quietly, its energy output level steady and constant. He inserted a small piece of corroded metal into the input chamber and activated the process. The blue light passed over the material, disintegrating it with sterile accuracy. Energy levels rose steadily, and soon the operation was done. The output chamber opened to show a small, immaculate ingot of raw metal. Izuku grasped the ingot and examined it in his hands, studying its texture and makeup. Acceptable, he stated bluntly. He noted in his journal, parameters optimal. Efficiency, 98.7%. The sun reflected off a sea of crushed metal and broken glass as Izuku knelt on the coarse sand. His material analyzer whirred quietly in his palm, an island of soothing precision in the sea of devastation on the beach. The screen burst into life, a live reading of the object in front of him, a rusty, serrated pipe. Material, iron. Integrity, 78%. Processable? Yes. Izuku's gaze narrowed in contentment. Good enough, he said to himself, tossing the pipe into the usable pile. To his right was a burgeoning heap of worthless trash, bent wires, broken plastics, and composites that were too far gone even for his renewable matter converter to process. He'd go through the pile again when he improved, but currently, efficiency took precedence. The second object was a broken console screen, its broken edges shining in the sunlight. Izuku tugged at the scanner, restricting the field to obtain a more accurate reading. Material, mixed silicates. Integrity, 21%. Processable, limited. Energy cost, high. He scowled. Not worth the trouble, he concluded, putting it into the discard pile. The exercise was not merely about saving materials, it was about honing his judgment, ensuring that every decision made sense and was considered carefully. The beach hummed with subdued purpose, the whir of the renewable matter converter barely audible in the distance. The machine toiled busily, breaking down unusable materials into dense, energy-dense blocks. It wasn't quite as efficient or quick as Izuku wished, but it was a work in progress, just like everything else in his life. Izuku retreated, looking at the skeletal structure of his workshop critically. Steel beams gathered from discarded ruins provided the main support for the structure, and bolted panels acted as makeshift walls. It was not ideal, but it was a tangible representation of his relentless drive. This will have to do for now, he grunted, wiping sand from his hands. He looked up at the sky, observing the sun lower on the horizon. The burnished orange color told him how late it was becoming. Izuku didn't want to risk his luck. His being gone wouldn't be missed forever. As soon as Izuku stepped into the house, he could hear the bright, cheerful voices of his family ringing out from the living room. He stopped in the hallway, just off view, eavesdropping. Okay, how was training today, Himari? His mother's voice sounded bright and proud. Fantastic, Himari said, her voice full of confidence. Dad says I'm improving at using my quirk. I even got a proper punch-in during sparring. Izuku could almost hear All Might's thunderous laugh. That's my girl. Just keep it up, and before long you'll be better than me. Izuku's expression didn't change as he walked down the corridor, his steps silent on the wooden floorboards. He slipped into his room, unseen, the door softly clicking shut behind him. His bedroom was small but highly organized. Blueprints covered the walls, each of them charting his inventions in excruciating detail. Notebooks filled with figures and alterations sat in neat piles on the desk, along with a small selection of tools and half-built gadgets. Sitting, Izuku retrieved his notes from the previous session, turning to a diagram of the pulse generator upgrade. His pencil danced above the paper, his mind already making calculations on how he'd correct the inefficiencies he'd seen during the previous test. Below him, the discussion of Himari's training continued, the noise fading as Izuku became engrossed in his task. The following day, Izuku sat at the back of the class, notebook laid out in front of him. As the teacher lectured on Newtonian mechanics, Izuku's mind was elsewhere. His pencil glides with silent ease, drawing the shape of a new device. Alongside it, figures filled the margins, outlining energy yield, field stabilization factors, and potential points of failure. On the other hand, he held a quantum mechanics textbook he had borrowed from the school library. Every line he read evoked a new idea, which he rapidly scribbled down. His objective was straightforward: tune up the energy shield prototype to sustain increased levels of stress, yet remain efficient. Izuku Yagi. The teacher's piercing voice severed his train of thought like a whip. Izuku levelly regarded the teacher, a mask of neutrality on his face. Yes, sir? The The teacher waved her hand impatiently at the problem on the board. Solve it. Izuku stood up, taking measured strides to the front of the room. He had the problem kinetic energy equations and computed it mentally. Taking up the chalk, he wrote down the solution in careful lines. 3,600 joules, he said, returning the chalk. The frown on the teacher's face grew deeper, evidently irritated that Izuku hadn't made a mistake. Right, but perhaps you could listen for once. Izuku nodded once and sat back down. Around him, whispers broke out. He must be thinking he's a genius or something. One of his classmates grumbled. Another snickered. If he think he's a genius just because he was able to solve one problem, then I'm all might. From the front of the room, Himari swiveled in her seat, smiling. Don't be so rough on him, she teased. That's all he has in his arsenal. He's quirkless, remember? If he were to dumb and quirkless, that's two deformities. He would basically be an artifact. The room chuckled, but Izuku didn't flinch. His pencil kept going, his concentration undeterred. When Izuku came back to the beach, the sun was already setting, the sky colored in shades of red and gold. His backpack was also heavier than normal, loaded with equipment and parts he'd retrieved from the day's garbage cans. He got to work straight away, screwing panels into position and bracing the frame of his workshop. The generator purred quietly as he connected it to fuel his lights and equipment, filling the room with a steady light. With the workshop already coming together, Izuku focused on the pulse generator, determined to rectify its remaining shortcomings. The previous test had indicated instability at higher frequencies, and he couldn't have such vulnerabilities in the field. He tweaked the modulator, retuned the connections, and tweaked the power output. When the device activated, humming faintly, Izuku experienced a rush of excitement. Let's observe how you do this, he whispered, pointing at a pile of sand. The pulse spread out, sending the sand flying in a controlled eruption. The motion was smoother than ever, the energy more concentrated. Observation, stability bettered. Efficiency rate raised by 12%. More adjustments needed. Izuku wrote down the findings in his notebook, already thinking of ways to improve the next version. Night had properly set in by the time Izuku exited the workshop, his bag on his shoulder and his devices tied up. He strode purposefully, his footsteps ringing through the empty streets. The suburb became darker and grittier as he moved deeper, the light of street lamps replaced by dimming bulbs and towering silhouettes. He took a corner and halted. In front of him, there was a gang of thugs standing against an old building, their tones low and coarse. Izuku didn't even flinch, his face serene as he walked towards them. A thug caught his eye, his gaze narrowing. What have we got here? Izuku's hand went to the pulse generator beside him. His actions were practiced, his features impassive. Hey, kid, another thug sneered, advancing. Lost or something? The night sky stretched above Izuku Yagi, veiled in faint clouds that obscured the stars. He walked with an unhurried pace, each step deliberate, his bag secure on his shoulder. The weight inside it wasn't just tools or gadgets, it was potential. Every device had been carefully crafted and upgraded in the crucible of his workshop. Tonight wasn't a simple field test. It was data collection, validation. As the streets grew darker, the hum of city life faded into distant murmurs. Izuku adjusted his path, steering toward the quieter, more decrepit part of town. The flickering of dying streetlights overhead cast erratic shadows, but Izuku remained calm. He had scouted this area thoroughly, and the alleyway he chose led to a dead end he could control. The faint shuffle of footsteps behind him confirmed it. He glanced over his shoulder just enough to see them, a group of 4 men emerging from the shadows. Their laughter and coarse voices echoed through the narrow street. Hey, kid, one of them called, his tone laced with mockery. Where do you think you're going? Izuku didn't respond. Instead, he subtly quickened his pace, leading them deeper into the alley. The thugs followed, their confidence growing with every step. I'm talking to you, brat. The leader barked, his voice harsher now. The sound of heavy boots grew louder as they closed in. Izuku reached the dead end, stopping a meter from the chain-link fence. He turned slowly, his expression cold and unreadable. He set his bag down with meticulous care, kneeling to unzip it. The leader, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, smirked. Oh, you've got something in there for us, huh? What is it? Cash. A phone. Tools. Maybe. added the heavy-set thug with tattoos covering his arms. Probably thinks he's a mechanic or something. Izuku remained silent, his hands moving with practiced precision as he retrieved the pulse generator. The device hummed faintly, its glow casting an eerie light on the alley walls. The leader squinted at the strange gadget. What the hell is that? Izuku pressed the trigger without a word. A shockwave burst forth, rippling through the air with a low-frequency thrum. The scar-faced leader stumbled, his balance thrown off as the force hit him squarely. Behind him, his companions winced and staggered, clutching at their heads as the pulse disrupted their equilibrium. Izuku didn't rush forward. Instead, he reached into his pocket and retrieved a notebook, jotting down observations as the thugs recovered. Pulse generator, effective within 6 meters. Disruption of inner ear balance consistent. Delay in secondary recovery noted. Adjust emitter frequency for faster neural disruption. The wiry thug with the blade was the first to recover, his face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, the blade gleaming in the faint light. Izuku calculated the trajectory, instantly diagonal slash aimed at his upper torso. He sidestepped with surgical precision, his hand darting to his grapple line. The cord shot out, wrapping tightly around the thug's wrist. Izuku yanked hard, forcing the man off balance and into the brick wall with a dull crack. The blade clattered to the ground as Izuku tightened the line further, immobilizing his target. Grapple line, tensile strength verified. Note: recoil delay tolerable, but could be optimized. He released the cord abruptly, letting the thug collapse to the ground, dazed. Turning his attention to the heavy-set man charging at him, Izuku activated the shockwave gauntlet. A quick twist of his wrist adjusted the output, and he drove his fist forward in a calculated arc. The kinetic burst erupted on contact, sending the man flying backward into a stack of rusted barrels. The metallic clang reverberated through the alley as the barrels toppled, burying the thug in a pile of debris. Izuku paused to observe the results, noting the distance traveled by his opponent and the level of destruction caused. Shockwave gauntlet, range and force output effective. Test against reinforced targets pending. The brass knuckles thug hesitated, his confidence wavering as he watched his comrades fall one by one. His gaze darted between Izuku's impassive face and the glowing devices in his hands. You think you're tough, huh? The thug spat, stepping forward. He raised his fists, the knuckles glinting in the dim light. Let's see how you handle this. Izuku didn't wait for the man to strike. He activated the energy shield, a translucent barrier flickering to life on his forearm. The thug's punch connected with the shield, the impact dispersing harmlessly across its surface. Sparks flew as the brass made contact, but Izuku remained steady. He shifted his stance, using the shield to shove the thug backward before deactivating it. The man stumbled, and Izuku followed up with a calculated kick to his knee, forcing him to the ground. Energy shield, power consumption minimal. Impact resistance satisfactory. The scar-faced leader, now recovered, grabbed a discarded pipe from the ground and swung it wildly. Izuku ducked, the pipe whooshing past his head. With one swift motion, he activated the sonic disruptor, its high-pitched frequency cutting through the air. The leader dropped the pipe, clutching at his ears as the device overloaded his senses. Izuku stepped forward, delivering a precise blow to the man's sternum with the gauntlet. The kinetic force drove him to the ground, gasping for breath. Sonic disruptor, frequency output verified. Adjustment required for prolonged exposure, risk of device overheating noted. Izuku scanned the scene, noting the positions of the fallen thugs. The alley was silent now, save for their groans and the faint hum of his devices. He knelt once more, pen in hand, and began writing down his final observations. General combat notes, efficiency satisfactory. Energy consumption levels stable across all devices. Areas for improvement identified in grapple line and sonic disruptor. Future tests required to assess long-term device durability. He stood, his calm gaze sweeping over the defeated group. There was no anger, no satisfaction, only a clinical detachment. Izuku reached down, retrieving his bag and securing his gadgets. As he turned to leave, the scar-faced leader managed to croak out a question. What the hell are you? Izuku glanced over his shoulder, his face expressionless. Efficient. Without another word, he disappeared into the shadows. leaving the thugs broken and bewildered. Back at his workshop, Izuku carefully disassembled the sonic disruptor, examining its components for signs of stress. The faint glow of his work lamp illuminated the organized chaos of his workspace: blueprints, tools, and spare parts scattered across the table. He made notes for adjustments, already envisioning the next iteration. Each confrontation was a step forward. Each flaw exposed was a lesson learned. Izuku Yagi didn't fight for glory or recognition. He fought for perfection, one device, one calculated action at a time. The soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above. The classroom was filled with the sound of idle chatter, papers rustling, and the sharp clack of shoes against tiled floors. Amid it all, Izuku sat at his desk, entirely unfazed by the world around him. His fingers slowly turned the page of the book he was reading, Quantum Mechanisms and Theories of Dimensional Overlap. His eyes scanned each line with sharp precision, his pencil tapping softly against his notebook as he jotted down notes in the margins. "Look at him," one student sneered from across the room. "Does he even understand what's written in that thing? He's just pretending." Another one laughed, his voice louder than necessary. "Trying to look smart 'cause he's got no quirk." The snickers spread across the room, cruel and calculated. But Izuku didn't acknowledge them. He was already too focused on his task to give them the reaction they were looking for. His attention remained fixed on the page, turning each with deliberate, measured care. "Pathetic," one of the boys muttered as they turned away, clearly disappointed by Izuku's lack of response. It was all predictable. Every day, the same taunts, the same mockery. But today, something about the book caught his attention. If reality is but a series of frequencies and vibrations, then, in theory, one could harmonize those frequencies to create a bridge, a portal from one point in space to another. Izuku's pencil paused mid-tap. His eyes narrowed just slightly as his brain processed the sentence, moving at the usual clinical pace. For a moment, everything else in the room ceased to exist. His body, still and unmoving, reflected the same mechanical precision that defined his thoughts. Harmonize frequencies to create a bridge. The words processed with a cold, calculating efficiency. There was no emotional response, no rush of excitement. Just an immediate, logical analysis. The idea was intriguing, but its potential had to be evaluated, refined, tested. His pencil resumed its motion, now writing down his thoughts and observations, his mind already running through a sequence of possibilities, each more calculated than the last. But before he could go deeper, the sound of the classroom door sliding open broke his concentration. The teacher had arrived. Izuku's hand moved without hesitation, slipping the book into his bag with precise, methodical motions. His mind remained fixed on the theory, but the situation required no further action. The teacher's presence was a distraction, and Izuku had no intention of engaging with it. "All right, take your seats," the teacher barked, and the classroom settled into an uneasy quiet. Izuku simply adjusted his posture, mentally filing away the new concept for later, where it would be analyzed further in the silence of his workshop. His focus had never wavered. Even now, as the noise of the classroom returned, his mind was already several steps ahead, processing the implications of what he had just read. The day crawled forward, but like all things, it eventually ended. The bell rang, students rushed out, and Izuku remained behind, quietly packing his books. He'd be going to the workshop today, but first, he had one last note to finish copying. The door slid open. 3 figures stepped in. Izuku knew who it was before he even looked up. Bakugo. Deku. Bakugo's voice echoed with that sharp, dangerous edge. Izuku glanced toward him, unimpressed. "You're early," he said, stuffing his notebook into his bag. "Just in time. I needed test subjects for some new gadgets." "You think we're your test subjects now?" sneered one of Bakugo's lackeys as he stepped forward. "You better watch your mouth, freak." The boy lunged, throwing a wild punch toward Izuku's face. But instead of panicking, Izuku's hand moved with precise calm. A soft bzzzt followed as a shimmering, hexagonal energy shield formed in front of him, absorbing the punch with a thump. Izuku didn't hesitate. He swept the boy's legs with a low kick, sending him crashing to the ground. The second lackey rushed in, but Izuku raised his hand again. His glove shifted, the red metal panels clicking into place like clockwork. From a concussive shockwave rippled through the air, sending the second boy flying backward. He slammed into a desk, coughing as he hit the ground. Learning, Izuku muttered as he shook his hand free from the glove's locking mechanism. Of course, Bakugo grinned. His palms cracked with sparks as he crouched low. You think I'm dumb enough to come at you head-on like last time? Izuku's eyes narrowed. He's waiting for me to act first. But Bakugo didn't wait. He launched forward, an explosion propelling him toward Izuku. At the last second, he changed direction, veering to Izuku's blind spot. Izuku spun, aiming a kick at Bakugo's face, but Bakugo caught it mid-swing. Gotcha, Bakugo hissed before a flash of orange light detonated in Izuku's face. The blast sent Izuku flying back into the wall. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling, and the room went quiet. Not bad, Izuku coughed as he stood, brushing off the dust. I have. The door suddenly slid open. Their teacher walked in, eyes sharp as ever. What's going on in here? He barked. It was Yagi, Bakugo said quickly, pointing. He started it. Yagi. The teacher raised an eyebrow. You mean Izuku Yagi? His eyes scanned the room. Where is he? Bakugo spun around, eyes wild. What? His gaze darted to every corner of the room. He was right here. The teacher scowled. Stop wasting my time. Clean this mess up. He grabbed some papers from his desk and left without another word. Bakugo's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. Slowly, his gaze dropped to the floor. Dust was scattered everywhere except for a small, faint footprint leading toward the door. Outside the school gates, Izuku's silhouette flickered into view like a mirage resolving itself into reality. The faint hum of energy faded as he removed a sleek, matte gray helmet from his head. He ran his fingers along the smooth surface, eyes flicking to a small dent near the ear. Still needs work, he muttered to himself as he stuffed it into his bag. Back at his workshop, Izuku sat motionless at his desk, a faint light from the overhead lamp casting sharp shadows across his face. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the edges of the book before him, his mind completely absorbed in its contents. It had taken him hours to read, to analyze each word and concept. Yet, despite the depth of the information, it wasn't enough. The theories presented were insightful, but incomplete. They were nothing more than fragments of a puzzle he had already begun to piece together, but a crucial piece was still missing. Izuku needed more data, more clarity, more precision. He needed to understand the mechanics fully before he could take any meaningful steps forward. He closed the book, leaning back in his chair, the creak of the leather echoing in the silence of the room. He didn't waste time with idle thoughts or hesitation. This was a problem that required resolution, not deliberation. His eyes flickered over the workshop, scanning the various gadgets and blueprints scattered about, but he knew the answer wouldn't lie there. The information he sought was beyond the confines of this place. With a single, decisive movement, he stood and grabbed the book, slipping it into the bag at his side. There was only one place where the knowledge he needed could be found: the city library. The familiar scent of old paper and dust filled his senses as he stepped through the front doors of the city library. The soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the faint rustling of pages made the space feel timeless. This was one of the few places where Izuku felt at peace. The librarian glanced up from her desk as he approached. Back again, huh? She said, her voice laced with mild amusement. Izuku gave her a small nod, quietly handing her the book he'd borrowed last week. Her eyes briefly scanned the title. Quantum mechanisms, huh? Still on the science binge, I see. He didn't respond, heading straight for the science section. He moved with purpose, eyes scanning the spines of books with precision. Quantum fields, wave resonance, harmonic vibrations. His gaze locked onto one title: wave-particle duality and spatial overlap. He pulled it from the shelf, running his fingers over the cover before tucking it under his arm. He continued searching, adding a few more books to his growing stack. Once satisfied, he carried them to the front desk. The librarian raised an eyebrow at the sheer number of books. Interesting choice of books, must say, she muttered with a grin as she scanned them. You know, I've never seen a kid like you before. Most kids your age are outside playing with friends or something. You, though, always reading. I want to borrow all of these, he said with a neutral tone, ignoring her comment. Quite stingy, aren't ya? She replied, shaking her head but scanning the books anyway. Once she was done, she handed them back to him. Try not to break your back carrying all that. Genius. Izuku gave her a small nod and walked out, arms full of knowledge. Back at his workshop, Izuku unpacked his books and notes onto his desk. He sat down, picked up wave-particle duality and spatial overlap, and flipped to the introduction. His pencil was ready, his notepad open beside him. Hours passed. The room grew colder as the sun dipped below the horizon, but Izuku didn't notice. Pages turned, notes were scribbled, and sketches filled the corners of his notebook. Every so often, he'd mutter something like, "That's it," or not quite, as he connected one concept to another. At some point, he glanced at the clock and saw that it was already midnight. His body ached from being in one position for too long. Stretching his arms, he felt a small pop in his back. Time to head home, he thought. He packed his notes into his bag, making sure every sheet of paper was accounted for before locking up the workshop. The house was dim, save for the soft glow of the kitchen light. Izuku quietly stepped inside, placing his bag on the floor. On the counter, a plate of food was waiting for him, kept warm beneath a lid. It was rice, miso soup, and some fried fish. He stared at it for a moment, his gaze distant. Slowly, he lifted the lid and sat down. As he ate, his mind wandered back to Dr. Kuroda's book. If reality is just frequencies, the phrase echoed in his mind. Each repetition revealed new possibilities, each more ambitious than the last. His hand moved on its own, picking up rice with his chopsticks, but he wasn't truly present. He was still in his workshop, in his mind, drawing diagrams on the wall, calculating frequencies, and testing theories. After finishing his meal, he quietly placed the dishes in the sink and headed upstairs. His bedroom was modest: a simple bed, a desk, and a corkboard with more notes pinned to it. He sat at his desk and pulled out his newest acquisition, Resonance Theory, a deeper look. He read until the glow of dawn crept through his window. Several weeks later, the scene at his workshop had changed dramatically. Pages of notes were no longer scattered randomly. They were organized in a system only Izuku could understand. Each page was pinned to the wall in a meticulous sequence. Equations connected with red string formed a web of logic. The messy chaos of earlier weeks had evolved into something greater. Izuku stood in the center of it all, a pencil tucked behind his ear, his eyes scanning the entire layout like a general surveying a battlefield. His notebook lay on the table beside a new set of sketches. There it was: the frame, the containment field, the emitters, and the power source. Each piece had been theorized, calculated, and improved. No longer random thoughts. No longer ideas. This was something else entirely. A blueprint. He stepped back, arms crossed. The weight of everything, weeks of sleepless nights, relentless research, and failed concepts, finally settled on his shoulders. But it didn't feel heavy. He glanced at the notebook one last time, a grin tugging at the corner of his lips. "No more reading," he muttered. His gaze shifted to his tools and raw materials, his eyes sharp with resolve. Time to build. So, this was the end of part 1 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.